Good evening, everybody. Here we are, Tuesday night, 6:23 p.m. Eastern time. Uh, still, awaiting the results of the midterm elections. Please refer to the website's special video we made about the importance of the elections and the big cosmic tikkun we can make by voting for the sake of furthering God's agenda in the world. And if you haven't voted yet, go out and vote. We are now cutting this video in preparation, rather, to fulfill our promise of beginning to dish out on the XLerate program starting tomorrow, November 9th. So we are cutting this video this evening, and hopefully you will all receive it. We'll have access to it in good time tomorrow, the morning of the 9th, and we hope that it will coincide with good news. That Hashem has done something to raise up His glory in America and in the world. So what I want to discuss today is that I've been receiving some, I wouldn't call it pushback. I would just say, I wouldn't even call it skepticism. Yeah, I think people, very honestly and not even cynically, just asked, how are you going to do it? How are you going to pull off, giving 20 years worth of orientation just 2 years? That's from the a person. That's the type of question, inquiry I got from people who are not privileged to have a yeshiva education, and from people who had a yeshiva education. Said, "Hey, I've been in this," and sometimes people have been learning for like 30 years. I've been at this for 30 years. It never clicked. It never settled. I just have a lot of confusion. I just know a little bit about a lot of different things. How are you going to straighten it all out for me and give me seder, give me order, orientation, right? In just 2 years, I've been at this for more than 20 years, right? These are the types of questions we've been getting. And I want to address that, explain, the program and how it works. And it's all really based on the Ramchal in his model of education at the beginning of his Derech Hashem, of the proper way to learn, and which is the proper way to teach. And if you're teaching yourself, this is how you should go about it. Right? So let me first, issue a clarification. It's not even a disclaimer because I never claimed anything that could remotely sound like what I'm about to say. I am, for lack of a better word, disclaiming, but I never promised to teach you Hebrew or Aramaic, right? Learning a new language, to the point where you're fluent in it, and you could just read like that, right? Or, even not reading so fast, but, sorry if you want to be conversant in it, to carry a conversation, but even just to be able to figure it out with, not having to constantly refer to a translation. That is not the product that we're offering, right? Language skills, which as you get older, it becomes harder and harder to learn a new language. Just kids have a gift of picking it up. There's something special about the young mind. It's when you're young, it's easy to learn a new language. The older you get, the harder it is. And there is no shortcut to that. There is no shortcut to learning a language, word by word. What is a language? Words. There's like, as opposed to a certain intellectual discipline, as we're about to explain, there are principles and then there are details. In a language, there are certain general grammatical principles, but you have to learn the words. And every word is equally as important, right? So it's not like principal words and detail words. I mean, there is actually in Hebrew in a certain way that we're not going to engage in, but find yourself a teacher who may teach you this way. There is something in Hebrew called shorashim, right? there are root words that other words are derived from, and if you know that system, it could be it could really be a solid clue to figuring out what certain words are. You might recognize the root of the word, right? So yeah, no question about when embarking upon learning a new language. I don't know if other languages are structured like Lashon HaKodesh, but Lashon HaKodesh for sure, you should learn the Shorashim, right? And even so, even Lashon HaKodesh, you really should go to a principle versus detail approach. But still, words are words, and how many Shorashim are there? Probably hundreds, right? It's not a few Shorashim, as many, so if a language consists of a few thousand words, there's probably at least a few hundred shorashim, I'm guessing. So, I mean, by language, there's no replacement to trial, error, hire yourself a tutor, or learn with a chavrusa that is proficient. There is no, as a word, for lack of a better word, shortcut, even though what I'm advocating is not shortcuts at all. It's a certain systematic approach that's laid out by the Ramchal in his Hakdama to Derech Hashem. But I'm just saying his system, which he tried to apply to Hebrew also, but to the grammatical rules, not to the detailed words, right? To the grammatical rules. He has a Sefer HaDiktuk, right? So I'll get back to that in a second, right? But I just want to get this out of the way, that the entirety of this 2-year curriculum is all going to be in English, right? We are not dealing with Hebrew or Aramaic, right? We are just dealing with the principles of the Torah, right? And I'm mastery of how to read Tanakh, Mishnah, or read Gemara, read Zohar, which is a different dialect of Aramaic. That is a very hard endeavor of which I do not know any shortcuts. What the Ramchal did in his Sefer HaDiktuk, he doesn't play, or his Sefer HaMelitza, he's not teaching you Hebrew. He's teaching you a systematic approach to the grammatical rules, but the grammatical rules, not the detailed words. All right? Okay, so I hope I've articulated this clearly, and if anyone had the mistaken expectation that in 2 years you'll be able to read Gemara or Tanakh, like someone who's been in yeshiva for 20 years. No, we're not. The language of Hebrew and Aramaic is not part of the curriculum, right? And now we're getting back to exactly what the curriculum is: orientation, right? And to a word to the frustrated yeshiva alumni out there, right, who have expressed interest in this program, and which surprised me. Even though I mentioned something in the original announcement, in the original announcement video, I was surprised by how many yeshiva alumni have expressed interest. I thought it would be primarily of interest to newcomers, Baalei Tshuva, or people who, unfortunately, because of circumstances, had to drop out of yeshiva. And I was quite surprised at the number of yeshiva alumni who did well in yeshiva that are interested in this program. Because as the Ramchal, saw already hundreds of years ago, and he lays this out as Hakdama Derech Hashem, throwing a lot of details at people, right? You just lose the forest and the trees. It's overwhelming, and it's not very pleasurable detail, because you could, as he says, to understand the significance of something, you have to have a picture of the whole and how it changes something in the whole. All right, so if you want to know, they tell you there's this and this piece of anatomy. They teach you in biology. Let's say there's this and this thing in the soul. I mean, not so. I meant cell. I'm thinking too spiritual. There's such and such a thing, right, in a cell, right? Okay, so what? So it's just another detail you're throwing at me, and cells don't mean anything to me either. And nuclei and mitochondria. So you have to give a person a general idea of life and how the cell is a building block of life. And this thing that I just taught you about, this is what the difference it makes in the cell, which hence makes a difference in life. You have to have a certain picture of the whole to see the significance of the parts. right? And imagine the other way around, just going for the whole and, initially ignoring the parts. When you encounter the parts, the details, you have a filing. Oh, you immediately understand where it fits and where it belongs because you have the whole. You have a concept of the whole. And when you start learning these details, every time you see a detail, wow, this belongs here. That belongs there. This affects this. That affects that. As opposed to just being flooded with details, where it's just too much to retain, and there's no intellectual satisfaction. It's just a lot of memorization. That, of course, at one point you give up, you get frustrated. Sadly, many schools, just throw details. They just throw information at you without giving any larger context, not history and not in the discipline in general of whatever you're learning, right? And and not its meaning, spiritual meaning. So you get frustrated. So a lot of yeshiva guys, they heard a shir on that thing. They heard a shir on that thing. They know some details about Shor Amud. They know some things about Nizkei Regel, but they don't have, the whole. Right? It was never taught, sadly, properly of going from principles first, get the principles first, and then go into the details. So even though Mishnah relative to Gemara are principles versus the details, but even the way they were taught Mishnahs, they threw a lot of Mishnayos at them, memorized the Mishnah without presenting in a manner that the Mishnah paints a picture. This parak, this aspect of the picture, that parak, that aspect of the picture. This parak in the Masechta is really a commentary on 2 prakim earlier, right? Giving like a map, and an orientation, right? And then, teaching the Mishnah in a way that you have principles, and the principles are arranged into a integrated system. And then when you come to all the details of the Gemara, it's so geschmack. You understand, what it is and what it changes and where it fits. And it's also at that point easier to memorize because you have this internal filing cabinet and organized, not just a monolithic, shelves, but a filing cabinet of topics, orderly topics, and those orderly topics in your own mind are also arranged in the way that they interface with each other, right? Not a monolithic, gray old filing cabinet. So you have a filing system, but a filing system of significance, of living categories. So immediately you see the deal, you know exactly where to plug it in. And then the Ramchal, ends it off when presenting his motto. That's what the book Derech Hashem is. It is, but all his books are that way. But his Derech Hashem book in particular is like the system of Jewish faith and theology. And it is really a filing system. It's Mishnah. And he says, you have to be careful with every word alludes to something else and the way it's set up. It's, I thought about exactly how to set it up, what should come first, what should come second, what should be a commentary on what. And these are all just general categories. So it's 163 pages, but it's the categories that could contain the entirety of our faith system and the main points that the Arizal discusses in Torah, be it the, what we need to know about the design of the Olamis, what we need to know about angels, and what we need to know about the Kavanas. It's an amazing book. And all his books are that way, that they're very brief. So you think that there can't be too much information. No, it's a lot of information and presented well, but it's so small because he goes for the principles, not for the details. The rest is just details. But if you have the principles straight, when you encounter the details, you'll know exactly what they are and where they belong and what they affect and the difference that they make. That's what our program is. But by the way, that's why the one book that we will do inside, word for word, in the second year of the program will be the Derech Hashem, because it was his magnum opus in being the Ramchal. You know what I mean? I mean, he has more advanced books in Kabbalah, like the Das Tvunas, the Klach, the Adir B'Moro, right? But it was where he was the most Ramchaldik, as we say, right, was in his Derech Hashem. And he says it himself in his introduction. That's where he outdid himself. right? The system, just the pure essential system. The rest is just details. And he said he set it up in a way that's you have the perfect living system, which is also like a living filing cabinet full of life, and you'll know exactly where the details belong as you learn them, whenever you encounter them, whether immediately after learning the book or a few decades later. You've got that system that everything fits in, right? All right, so that is the approach of the XLerate program. It is rightfully called XLerate, that, because sadly, in the Torah world and even in the secular world, I'm sure it's worse in the secular world, right? The approach is just to bombard you with information. But what's the system and what's the meaning and why do I really need to memorize this? What's the point, right? Well, you'll figure it out yourself. It's not done in a systematic, principled approach that first give the principles and the essential system, and that gives a picture of the whole. And then when you, as soon as you encounter it, you immediately, oh, this belongs to that, and it fits in over there. And it's also geschmack. You understand its significance immediately because you have a picture of the whole that it's a part of. That's what we're doing in the XLerate program, right? We are focusing on the principles. So not on language, which involves a lot of details, because again, the Ramchal being the Ramchal, always looking for the system. So he has a Sefer HaDiktuk, but it's the principles of the grammatical rules, right? Not the detailed words, right? Sefer HaMelitz also, how to be particularly eloquent, right? But it's the system. It's not, but a language is not just the system of the language, that you can't get by in a language just knowing the principles. You need the detailed words, right? So, so he, as far as the grammatical rules, he zeroed in on the principles, right? But you have to learn the detailed words, and that's beyond the scope of what we do. And there is, I don't know, a method to, in a accelerated way, learn a whole language. We could, follow the Ramchal's Sefer HaDiktuk to have a crash course in the essential laws of Diktuk. Right, but we're not talking about mastering a language that you're going to have to master a language. You need a few hundred words, keywords, to be conversant in whatever words apply to whatever topic. All right, we're not doing that. We're not concentrating on language, which the details are unavoidable. Right, we are going for the principles of Torah. Right, so now we mentioned in the curriculum that's published on the website that we're going to do Mishnah, because that's what Mishnah is. That's what Rebbe meant for the Mishnah to be. The Mishnah was actually devised, earlier in history. Rebbe just gave the final edit and collation. The Mishnah's principles, right? And we're going to teach the Mishnah, as the principles, that the Gemara refers to. We will point out the major principles that the Rambam points out in his commentary on the Mishnah. And what does the Rambam do in his commentary? He says his agenda is to, first of all, say what the halacha is. If there's a machlokas in the Mishnah, who the halacha is like. That's something that's worth knowing, right? But he also says if the Gemara ever explained the Mishnah, because there was a certain principle that the Mishnah left unwritten, right? That was only carried on orally. And the Gemara points that out. Okay, so that principle is pointed out by the Rambam and Pirush HaMishnayos. So what supplements the Mishnah performing the function of the Mishnah, of being a book of principles, right? The Rambam supplemented with the principles in the Gemara that sometimes may have not been written out in the Mishnah, right? The principles are, of course, not all the principles that are in the Gemara, but the ones that are necessary and complete the picture of the Mishnah. Necessary to understand the Mishnah and complete the picture that the Mishnah is talking about. So that's what we're going to do. It's going to be, I will give this over orally in my own words, but we will follow the order of the Mishnah. And we're doing in that approach the principles that the Mishnah is teaching, supplemented with the principles that the Rambam imported from the Gemara, which are necessary to complete the picture that the Mishnah is just trying to paint, but it's just principles, but we're going to teach it in a living way of how this Masechta is structured and how later chapters are sometimes commentary on earlier chapters. So some chapters are another level of information, right? Some are just a commentary on an earlier chapter, and we're going to point that out in a living way. So we're going to go through the principles, going in the order of the Mishnah, of Nezikin and Moed, we said for year one. Now for the laws of Shabbos are very systematic. Now we're going to be drawing from a few different books. Again, it's all going to be in my words, right? We will publish some supplementary written material that I will write, but I am working based on books that dealt with the laws of Shabbos as a system, not just detail, this law, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, but it's like a system, right? There's first and foremost what you guys must have heard of, the Lamed Tes Malachos. Avos Malachos. There are 39 main categories of work that are prohibited on Shabbos. There are categories, and there are the toldos of the avos, right? There's the main derivatives, and there's and around the main categories and the main derivatives, there's some durabbanans that Chazal outlawed because they look deceptively similar to what the Torah outlawed, so they had to outlaw these things also, because if these things remain permitted, people might think that the stuff that's really prohibited is also permitted, right? But it's done in a systematic way. So we have tochein as an example, the main category of grinding. So of course the original grinding that was done in the Mishkan, which is where we take the examples of what's prohibited on Shabbos, was grinding up the dyes, grinding up, grinding up the grain to create the dyes. But as the Rambam says, I'm quoting from the Rambam in the 7th chapter of Hilchos Shabbos, you got to think conceptually, right? Grinding is to take a big object and break it up into smaller objects, right? However, there is one proviso. It was, we can't deviate from the main category that it was to grind up vegetation, right? So, of course, to grind up wheat into flour, even though it's not what's done in Mishkan, that's not even called a tolda. It's not even called a derivative. It's the same thing. It's something that grew, that, you're taking the main object and grinding it up into, smaller parts, right? So now, to be precise, even though the example in the Mishkan was to take, certain plants to grind them up to make the powder for the dyes, right? You're grinding up wheat into flour is not even a total. It's not even a derivation. It's the same thing, really, right? It's something grew out of the ground. Something grew out of the ground, and we, you grind a small piece. That's called me'ain. It's called, in the words of the Ran, it's called me'ain malacha. It is almost the same thing as the prime example, where it's like a derivation, right? Is that where you're thinking very conceptually, all right? So the prime example is something that grows, broken, ground up, right? But it grew from the ground. So taking a clump of earth or taking a stone that comes from the earth and pulverizing it is also tochein, but that's a tolda, because it's not, it's conceptually the same as the prime example, but it's not exactly the same. It's not the same thing, it's just cosmetically different. That's the difference between grinding wheat into flour or grinding, some type of, vegetation into dust that makes dye. So that's a cosmetic difference. Told us that it's cosmetically very different, conceptually the same. Right? So taking a clump of earth or a stone and pulverizing it. Right? Let's give another example from the Rambam. So building. So of course, to knock together, to nail together a bunch of sticks, that's bonet, right? That's putting things together. So now, does it make a difference if you knock together sticks or if you lay bricks, right? To the point that it becomes a solid wall? That's all called me'ain malacha. That's really, it's not even a derivation. It's the exact same thing. It's just cosmetically different, right? But where it's a tolda, right, is making cheese. Rambam's example, right? Well, bone, right, you pull the particles together into an integrated whole. That's what you do when you make cheese, right? The cream, the hard stuff that's, it's disparate. It's, it's, you know, dissolved in the milk, and then by making it cheese, it coagulates. It comes together. Making cheese on Shabbos is a tolda of bona. Right? Sounds fascinating, right? Geschmack. And this is what we're going to teach. We're going to teach the 39 categories. We're going to teach the system of the 39 categories and what they are, what they, the thing itself, the original example, what is the same, just cosmetically different, and what's a tolda that it's cosmetically very different, just it's the same concept. And then what's the things that the rabbis may have legislated because it looks very similar either to the Av or the tolda. Okay? All right, so now the way I described it, is it geschmack? That's a way to learn Hilchos Shabbos. It's like really, geschmack to listen to, and it's concepts, teaching categories, right? Categories, teaching a system, right? So you go through the 39 Os Malchim. Like there are many Sfarim that did that in our history, from the Tal Oros HaKadmon, excellent sefer by the, which I'm going to use I'm going to use for my own research as I give it over to you, the Kalkalat Shabbat of the Tiferes Yisrael on Mishnayos in his Hakdar Shabbos. And over there also he out in the very Ramchalian in how he goes. He makes principles of Davar She'eino Miskaven, like there's certain guiding principles in the laws of Shabbos, like Davar She'eino Miskaven, Lachshem Sechagufa, Misasek, Grama. He does everything, the concepts, these, key principles that run through. It's like a soul that runs through all the laws of Shabbos, and then the 39 categories. Now, so we're going to teach Hilchos Shabbos in that systematic approach. All right, so in that systematic approach, so we won't get to all the details, but you'll have the system, and then, like we said on the webpage for this program, you immediately on Shabbos you see something, you'll immediately be able to identify if it's an issue that you need to ask a rabbi about, because you have the system, and then you see this detail, even though we didn't discuss that particular detail that you're encountering, right? But you have a concept of what the laws of Shabbos, you have an orientation, like we said. So you immediately recognize if it's a shaila or not that you have to ask or look up. Going back to the system of Torah, Torah has a more elemental building blocks than the Masechtas of the Mishnayos, right? And they're called the Taryag Mitzvahs, right? And now the Taryag Mitzvahs themselves are categories because, let's say the not doing malach on Shabbos is only one negative commandment out of the 365. It's only one out of the 365. But as we said, Hilchos Shabbos is huge, right? How many books we have in Hilchos Shabbos? Right? It's 2 whole halakim of Mishnah Berurah, right? And it's just one negative commandment, right? So these negative, the 630 commandments are also folders of halachas. And that's another way to get a grip on the whole Torah, right? Is because we're going to teach, these 613 mitzvahs. But we're also going to teach them as they are, in truth, folders. And we're going to explain what are the main subfolders. So we're not going to get to all the details. We'll get to the major details that are contained in that mitzvah, and also true to the form of the orientation that we're promising to provide, where you will find halachas of that mitzvah in the Mishnah, Talmud, and in the Rambam and in the Shulchan Aruch. Right? And the same thing when we said Tanakh. We're not going to teach Tanakh in text, but we're going to teach the history and the basic moral messages that the Nevi'im came to teach us. Just providing a historical context that many people lack of which Navi lived when, who was the king at his time, who was his teacher. And we're going to give that the whole Masoret, right? The whole transmission from Moshe until Ravina and Ravashi, those 40 generations. In the second year, we'll deal with the transmission from the Ravina Ravashi to present day, giving historical context and who lived when, where. Right, there's that, but there's also the we don't necessarily have to read the Nevi'im inside. It would be better to read the Nevi'im inside, but for the sake of brevity, go through the main topics that are covered in Yoshua, Shoftim, Melachim, and maybe if time allows, we'll also give the main moral messages that are in each chapter of the Nevi'im. And again, but all against the backdrop of who this Navi was, where he lived, who his teacher was. By the way, we're going to provide, like we said, that exact same information as far as the Tanaim and Amoraim. And the Rambam did a lot of that work already. First of all, he did it in the Hagdar Tiyara Chazaka, the major players in the 40 generations, from Moshe Rabbeinu to Rabbi Ravashi. But he did a lot more detailed work in his commentary to the Mishnah. He has 10 chapters of introduction at the end of his introduction to the commentary, 10 of like all types of this type of information. Who lived when, who his Rebbe was, where he lived, and we will impart all that information. So, a lot of yeshiva alumni tell me that if they are lacking orientation as far as all the different mesechtas and concepts they encountered, they have almost zero historical orientation, and we're going to steer directly into that. All right, Bezrat Hashem. So this is how we're doing it. We're steering into the principles. We are not. We're not going to teach a language, because in a language, like I said, to be conversant in a language, not just to know the general grammatical principles, but that the Ramchal did. But we're not going to get into that, right? Because at the end of the day, to be conversant in a language, there's no avoiding the details. You need as many detailed words as you need to spell out the sentence, to spell out the paragraph, to spell out the thought, right? But so this, this series, right? This 2-year course, right, is all going to be in English, save in the last year I want to do the Derech Hashem inside for reasons that I explained. But it's going to be in English. It's going to be strictly steering into the klalim, the principles, to uphold what Chazal said, Lolam yu divrei Torah b'yadcha klalim v'lo pratim. The way the approach to Torah and the way to memorize Torah is to go for the principles and not the details. Let the principles be living in your head and heart, and the details will just fit into them as you encounter them, but go for the principles. That's what the Ramchal taught us. That is what this XLerate program is all about. So indeed, if you're going steering directly into the all-encompassing principles, you could get 20 years of orientation. I stress orientation. 20 years of, that the orientation you pick up by osmosis after 20 years of being bombarded with details. Yeah, if you steer directly into the principles and the general orientation, you could do it in 2 years in the manner that we explained. Feel free to reach out to me, ask any more questions. I hope you'll be joining. So this is the video that we promised to drop for the November 9th, the day after the midterm elections. I hope it's the video is the release of the video, I say, will coincide with good news for America and for the world, Bezrat Hashem. All right, so we will release further preparatory videos before the course formally starts. We're waiting for a critical group of subscribers, right, to be committed to the program before we formally launch. Probably the formal launch will be probably in December, Bezrat Hashem. But between now and December, we will be releasing more and more videos outlining, and also some free samples, even though we gave a little bit for the Hilchos Shabbos side, but we'll release other free samples to know what you are hoping you will commit yourself to. Like we said in the first video, you don't have to go for the long haul. You could commit for just 1 year. You could commit for just 1 month also. Okay, let's hear good news. All right, Baruch should help. We should only hear Besuras Tovas. All right, and keep on checking the site for more videos like this. They'll be released in preparation for the XLerate program. Kol Tov, Besuras Tovas.